In UK politics, in particular, we have really been insulated. I suppose that's the best way to describe it. We've been insulated about trade deals for quite some time, quite a long time. We've never had, or at least have to had, discussions about trade deals in Parliament for a number of years. And you can see why certainly the Conservatives are really desperate not to actually have conversations about the Australia trade deal or even the New Zealand trade deal and actually bring these to a vote. Because if you look at countries around the world, discussions about trade deals are almost a regular fixture of yes, we should be doing this, or no, we should be doing this, or that was a really bad idea. We should be renegotiating it. And when we're in power, we're going to renegotiate this deal. That is a regular fixture of many countries around the world when it comes to trade deals. And it's not just one country that might decide, we're going to alter the deal. Because it looks like, especially the EU, which is very, very big on sort of protecting workers' rights, has basically come up and said, yes, this new deal or this new bill that Rishi Sunak is trying to pull to try and sort of at least try and limit these strikes that are having, which are, to be honest, very, very embarrassing for Rishi Sunak. He's trying to limit their actions to strike. And a lot of MEPs in the European Parliament are turning around and saying, no more further deals with the UK until the right to strike is protected. And good on them for doing that. Good on them for doing that, because that helps us out massively as well. I haven't heard what the reaction, certainly from our government, has been about this. I'm not 100% sure what it could be, but we'll see. We'll see what the reaction to this happens to be from the government. I don't know. I haven't heard anything at this point, but I highly suspect we might hear something soon. But anyway, before we go diving into this, what they've had to say about this, please do remember to hit that like, share, and subscribe button. And of course, down below, there are links to my Patreon page and a one-off donation link called Buy Me Coffee, where you can, buy me coffee. And as always, thank you very much to all those people who do help and support the channel. So, over we go to Open Democracy, with the title of EU is urged. EU is urged no deals with the UK unless right to strike is protected. The UK's controversial anti-strike law could hinder attempts to resolve the deadlock over the Northern Ireland after MEPs were today urged to ensure protection for workers as a condition for trade negotiations. This is not new. Any Brexiteer or anyone on the right who says that this is the EU trying to punish us, no. This is a regular fixture about trade deals. This happens all the time. So this isn't them bullying us. This isn't them punishing us. This happens all the time. So I'm really glad that they're up to this. And to be honest, I think Rishi Sunak will, again, fold completely, because he is desperately trying to resolve the Northern Ireland Protocol at the moment. We have seen that there has been good progress over that. So I think if this comes up, I think all of a sudden we could see that bill potentially, shall we say, get shelved or even kicked into the long grass. We can but hope. But we'll continue. So the EU and the UK are in a new standoff over the Northern Ireland Protocol, which was intended to tackle the post-Brexit border issues over the movement of goods. Business Secretary Grant Shapps unveiled plans earlier this month that could force strikers to back a minimum back to work to maintain the so-called minimum service levels in key industries. Ambulance workers in England, represented by Unison and Unite, walked out today, with further strikes by GMB and Unite in the northwest of England and Northern Ireland set to follow tomorrow and Thursday. The Prime Minister has sought to try and justify the bill by arguing that similar measures already exist in France, Italy, and Spain. And they've also argued this in America as well, but we'll get to that in a moment. But Open Democracy has revealed that the continental unions have rubbished the claims, pointing out that the UK has some of the most restrictive labour laws in Europe. That is true. Even when we were in the EU, we had some very, very restrictive labour laws. And most of these, unfortunately, date back to really Margaret Thatcher when she was, fighting the miners. And there were a lot of people when Labour came in 1997 said to Tony Blair, you need to remove these. You should remove some of those laws. But unfortunately, he never did. And we are still stuck with some very, very restrictive labour laws in the UK. And it has been some of the stuff that's come from the European Union that have actually eased those restrictions somewhat. But we are still under a very, very restrictive labour laws here in the UK. And of course, they did also go and say, oh, it's the US has similar laws as well. Even I think the US unions, or it might be even the Department for US Labor, I think, actually came out and said, no, that's not the case. But anyway, back to it. So now the General Secretary of the European Federation of Public Service Unions has written to MEPs closely involved with the UK-EU relations, urging them to factor in the growing gulf between labour rights in any ongoing negotiations. And bear in mind, as we said at the beginning, this is normal. Using trade deals to do this type of thing to other countries, perfectly normal. This happens all the time, both good and for bad as well. So, to be honest, good, because this is certainly pushing us in a right direction. And this is going to certainly show a lot of people why we should be really caring, certainly about regulations and indeed trade deals once again. But hey, we did warn you, but back to it. So, as members of the EU UK parliamentary delegation, we are asking you to look at workers' rights and especially the possibility that any trade agreement with the European Union should ensure the protection of the right of association and right to strike, wrote Jan William Goldman. We are asking you to publicly come out and support the right to strike and against the UK's government's unilaterally imposing minimum service levels. Gordon's letter addressed the EU delegation of the UK-EU Parliamentary Partnership Assembly and the European Parliament Committees for International Trade and Employment and Social Affairs. Separately, heads of the three biggest European trade unions have also issued a joint statement criticising the UK's government's proposals, calling for ministers to give public workers above inflation pay rises. So here you have it now. The EU and all those EU institutions massively supporting workers' rights. And I want to remember that certain unions in here, in the UK, claimed that we had to leave the EU in order to protect workers' rights. And yet here we are seeing European, labor unions come out and protect our rights. Why? There's a good reason for that, obviously, because, again, it's to do with trade deals. But again, as we said, this is a normal factor when it comes to discussing trade deals. So, ambulance workers have just accused the government of demonising them in order to justify this controversial bill. A letter from the paramedics and other members of the GMB union said that claims by ministers that the strike had put lives at risk were untrue and that the drivers left the picket lines to respond to calls. Leave a sparer. The General Secretary of the European Transport Workers Federation accused the government of hindering the right to strike, instead of tackling the root causes of industrial action. Yes, exactly. That is what is exactly going on. Their refusal to even acknowledge that there are problems going on. She said, "This is a battle for democracy, and we will fully support it. We are behind our UK trade unions," she said. Minimum service levels laws provide some provision for critical services, including emergency services, to continue running during industrial action. While France, Italy, and Spain have some form of these measures, trade unions have pointed out that specific staffing levels on strike days are agreed by negotiations between the trade unions and employers. The UK proposals, by contrast, would allow employers to issue work notices, requiring union members to continue working during strikes to meet these minimum service levels. And anyone issued a work notice who went on strike anyway would lose their legal protections from the disciplinary action and could be sacked. So, as you can see, there is a massive difference between the UK laws and the EU ones. In the EU, it's negotiated because, yes, they understand, you need emergency services to function, but let's sit down and negotiate to make sure that, even if you are on strike, those emergency services do continue to function. While the UK proposal is you're working, doesn't matter you're part of the union, and if you do go on strike, you're sacked. Massive difference. Shapps has said that ministers would consult during the passage of this bill through the Parliament what a minimum service level would be required for fire, ambulance, and rail services, adding that for other sectors covers in the bill, we hope to reach minimum service agreements so that we do not have to use these powers. The UK agreed a post-Brexit trade deal with the EU back in December of 2020, but relations between the EU and the UK have been strained by disagreements over the Northern Ireland Protocol. Last year, the European Commission took legal action against the UK for not keeping to the protocol, and both Boris Johnson and Liz Truss have threatened to scrap the agreement. Negotiations over changes have been underway since October. So, yeah, I mean, bear in mind, this bill is being done specifically to try and limit any strike action as much as possible. Let's be honest about this. Doesn't matter. They can dress it up and say, "Oh, we're gonna consult," but no, it doesn't matter. It is basically trying to take away as much power from workers striking as possible, because strikes very often for workers are like the option of last resort. And remember, if you've been listening to all the unions during all this time, they've all said, "Look, we've been trying to negotiate. We've been trying to talk to them. Let's do this. Let's do a deal." But every time it is the UK government saying, "No, we can't do a deal." And of course, they're left with no option but to go on strike to make their point heard. And that's what's going on. And it is this continuation that Rishi Sunak will not bend to these strikers, because if he does, there are a lot of right-wing Tories who will gladly, shall we say, start sharpening their hatchets to sort of ready to take him out. And of course, if he gives in to one union, then he has to give in to them all. Like I say, this bill does not address the root causes for why these people are going on strike. This bill does nothing except try to stop these people from going on strike and essentially being a massive embarrassment to the government, because they don't want to do any form of negotiations whatsoever. So this, unfortunately, can set, I think, a very bad precedent, but it also does show that the Conservatives have no intention of protecting workers' rights. That is why Labour, in the amendment to the EU Retained Law Bill, has said anything regarding workers' rights is not up for negotiation. Like, you cannot do anything unless you bring it to Parliament. So that is something to watch. But I'll tell you now, as I've said before, when it comes to sort of these regulations, I think potentially next year, if that bill goes through, if that passes, a lot of people are suddenly going to start learning about regulations and about how important those regulations really were. So, as always, thank you very much for watching. Please do remember to hit that like, share, and subscribe button. And of course, down below there are links to my Patreon page and one donation link called Buy Me Coffee, where you can buy me coffee. And as always, thank you very much for watching. And of course, we'll see you all next time.